Welcome to the Mike White Podcast, where I, Mike White, share my conversations and book reviews through my journey to learn all that goes on in this amazing world. Buckle up and enjoy the ride. If you're a regular listener of the podcast, you can support the show and help us grow by listening on Fountain, an awesome podcast app on iOS or Android. You can share your thoughts on this episode or simply say thanks by sending some sats with a comment. This is called the Boost. Getting started is easy. You can top up your Fountain wallet with a bank card or any Lightning wallet. Oh yeah, and you can earn sats just by listening on Fountain and being an active member of the community. Visit fountain.fm to learn more. All right, we're back on the Mike White Podcast, and I've got a local Austinite, Jon Gordon, visiting as well. So he's been huge in the Bitcoin space. I first met him when he was working on CrowdHealth, and he's gone on to now help out with Spirit of Satoshi, and he also has a great blog online at the Bitcoin Yogi. So I'll have all the links in the show notes for that blog, just writing on the kind of the convergence between Bitcoin and yoga. And it's just been great having Jon here locally in Austin to talk Bitcoin and just good people. So thanks for coming on the show, Jon.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Mike. And it was fun going to my first UT game a couple weeks ago with you. That was quite the experience as well. And yeah, haven't been in Austin a little over a year now. It was about time I got to a game, and it's been awesome connecting with the Bitcoin community here. So I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, that was awesome. You're good luck. So you'll have to go to more.
For sure.
But so I just want to dive into your story. So really, I think an easy way is what led you to Bitcoin. So growing up, I know you're from Chicago. What you think anything notable like from childhood, whether it be your relationship with money back in the day to how it developed and how you eventually found the value in Bitcoin.
Yeah, absolutely. As you said, I grew up outside Chicago in the suburbs, went to Northwestern University and actually started pre-med, really as a kid was always interested in math and science and really loved math as a kid in particular. So I think that aspect of Bitcoin and the numbers and just how it's, set rules and being so interwoven with math is something that really piqued my interest as I started digging into it. But even started pre-med and sort of got weeded out with many others who want to study science, but it's very driven towards, the med school focus. So I actually pivoted and studied economics and realized now that it was mostly the fiat Keynesian version of economics. But at the time, it's very hard to know the difference because that's just what was taught. But what really resonated with me was health economics. And that led me to work in the healthcare industry, was consulting for hospitals and health systems for a few years, worked in Medicaid at a large payer, worked at medical supplies, did a double master's in health economics and policy at UChicago and London School of Economics.
Wow.
So really dove deep into healthcare. And, throughout that time, obviously Bitcoin was around, having even taken a high school econ class around 2010, 2011, just when, Bitcoin was coming out and wasn't mentioned at all in college. Probably heard about it through Silk Road, some people buying things on the internet. I didn't get involved in that, so I'd never got any Bitcoin then. And then just with work and life was, focused on other things. And, fortunate with my upbringing and having the opportunities that I had, just never really found Bitcoin until 2020. I finished the double master's program in that summer. The last section was over Zoom, in spring of 2020. And then I got married in August of 2020. We were supposed to have May, and then that got pushed off. We had a small ceremony. And really at that time too, getting married, my wife, Erin, is amazing and has been an entrepreneur for many years. And then thinking about, our finances together and where are we going to be investing? What are we going to be doing together? And that it's not just me I'm responsible for now too. I started questioning and just thinking, hey, what is money? And having more time outside of work now to really go down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, and I'd been on Twitter all these years, so I was sort of surprised I didn't really find Bitcoin Twitter. I joined Twitter in 2010. I remember showing kids in high school like, hey, this is a Twitter thing. This is awesome. You guys should get on here. But really didn't find Bitcoin Twitter until that time. And then just with all the money printing, towards the end of 2020, then I actually won my fantasy football league and dumped all the winnings into Bitcoin and was like, all right, here we go. Let's really start learning about this, reading the Bitcoin standard, and really just going down and reading dozens of books in 2021 and 2022, and realizing then towards the end of 21, as I'd been reading more about Bitcoin, but hadn't really interacted with anyone in life, was just reading and following online, finally went to El Salvador, and I got this shirt, and went to the Adopting Bitcoin conference, just kind of on my own accord, wanted to meet people who are now still friends in this space, and remember, and now working with Svetsky, seeing his talk at Adopting Bitcoin, Michael from Oshi, and connecting with others and being like, wow, this is amazing. You can use Bitcoin every day. It's the best store of value we've ever come up with as humans. So going to El Zonte, hanging out on the beach, and then decided to leave my fiat job and travel the world with my wife. We went to Africa for a wedding when everyone's like, don't go to South Africa. We're like, we're going anyway. We got COVID. It was fine. We ate some oysters, and hung out a little bit longer because at that point you couldn't leave South Africa if you'd had COVID. But we made our way to Bali and quarantined for a week in a hotel just to get into Bali. So it was, kind of a crazy experience of them just, taking your passports and being, we had just had it, so we felt comfortable we weren't going to test positive again and get, taken away. But that was a really transformative experience for me because that led to my yoga teacher training in Bali. And that was, a 3-week experience where a very holistic program called House of Om, where you're learning about the history and philosophy of yoga. You're practicing meditation every day and yoga, learning how to teach, connecting with people from around the world. And as we were diving into a lot of those stories and principles, because I'd already now spent over a year really studying Bitcoin, I started to see a lot of the parallels between Bitcoin and yoga and all of these connections in my own mind that had even started beforehand as I'd been practicing yoga and sometimes have some of these epiphanies or really feeling calm, centered and present, to just think about the world differently. We did another week training that my wife then joined me for in Himalayan Kriya Yoga, which is a really unique lineage of yoga with a lot of breath work, releasing negative energy from the body. So I've really enjoyed teaching yoga and as well as Himalayan Kriya, and then wanted to really combine my background in healthcare and all this industry experience to Bitcoin. And that's when I heard about CrowdHealth and reached out to Andy, and that's how we landed in Austin. So just from a DM on Twitter and saying I really want to get in, to the Bitcoin space. He was talking about starting to offer, a Bitcoin savings option for Bitcoin Crowd members, and then having the opportunity to travel to different conferences and talk about Bitcoin and healthcare, while also sharing some of my other personal thoughts on Bitcoin and yoga, get involved in the Austin community. I mean, for me, it's just been an amazing experience. Feels very aligned and meeting amazing people where, I think where I grew up, we were very fortunate, and going to a public school that had a lot of resources, and also coming, from a very Jewish town as well. It's a big part of my identity. I studied in Israel in 2010, 10 years ago, for a semester at Hebrew U, and have interacted and worked with a lot of Israeli startups over the years. So seeing the innovation that comes out of Israel has also played a big factor for me, and I think my growth and wanting to get into startups and getting ideas off the ground. And so obviously this last week has been incredibly challenging for me as well, and having so many friends and family in Israel under attack from Hamas, a terrorist organization, and over 1,300 killed, and the war is going to continue on for a while now, and just seeing these cycles as well repeat over and over, and even the connection to Bitcoin there. The Genesis block, Chancellor on the brink of bailout of the banks. The other headline was Israel invading Gaza, and it's the same story over and over again. Ultimately, I think needing to separate money and state, can play a big role, but just having divisiveness, fear, and hate being indoctrinated, and instead of peace and coexistence. So my thoughts and prayers are with the people in the region, and my friends who are now fighting back in the reserves. I know you're a veteran in the U.S., Mike, and in Israel now 300,000 reserves have been called up for duty. So it's going to be really challenging, and but I think just again spells the importance of being connected, having community, friends and family that can support, because it's going to be some challenging times ahead.
Yeah, it's absolutely horrific what just happened out there, and uh, just all my support goes out to Israel and defending themselves and taking care of the enemy. And I mean, it's everything's bad about it, but I mean, I think there's no moral equivalency whatsoever, and it's kind of disgusting that I'm seeing that popping up. That Hamas is the bad guy, and it's not retribution or anything like that. This is and you were talking about like the startup scene, and I think that's one of the great kind of, just looking as an outsider, you can see just the attitude of growth and production and human life and human flourishing that the government and Israel has made for themselves. And whereas I see on the other end, it's a focus of destruction, of wanting death, of wanting all this other stuff, and not focus on just human flourishing. But that's, I mean, my outsider looking in. So I love that you're writing about it. I need to read the most recent article in your blog, but I think it's really important for people to speak up and that this doesn't need to be the norm going forward. Like, we don't have to live in a state of constant fear of terrorism. Like, it can be handled, and it needs to be.
Yeah, absolutely, and it can come from anywhere, and it's, I think, the general sense of nihilism as well. And I have another post on there about surviving lone wolf attack in my hometown, the Fourth of July parade last year, and having experienced that firsthand of bullets ringing out and being 100, 200 feet away from that, and thankfully getting my family out of there, and we were okay, but 7 people killed there. I can only imagine having been at this music festival, and over 250 were killed there of in Hamas infiltrating, just people trying to enjoy life and have a good time, and just getting shot down, and now hostages taken. It's horrible. It's despicable, and I just pray for peace, and I appreciate that support for sure, and have heard from a lot of people, and family and friends, and sending my best to my family and friends in Israel. And they've tried to go north and get out of the bombing, but they're still going to be second from Hezbollah. So it's going to be a long slog for sure. And I think the media portrayal of it is going to turn eventually as well, and continue to have pressure on Israel. And that's something I experienced at Northwestern as well, and kind of coming back to just education and how I was brought up too. We experienced the BDS movement there, boycott, divestment, sanction. There was people I had planned cross-cultural events with that all of a sudden were up there speaking really anti-Semitic and hateful things about Jews in Israel that really blindsided me at the time. This was 8 years ago. So that sort of sentiment on campus has continued. And I think, many, especially in the Bitcoin community, are waking up and realizing, and others, like, hey, this maybe doesn't make sense to send your kids there, or we don't need to go to college in the same way that we did. And there's such an amazing way to learn and have this information out there that I've seen firsthand, to even kind of relearn and reprogram my own thoughts. And I think a lot of people just obviously get set in their ways and what you've learned. But I think for me, always over the years, I felt like I am open-minded. I can understand the issues and really, analyze and then ultimately act on that. So that's where I'm really passionate about. Also bringing Bitcoin into healthcare and seeing the poor health of the population, $4 trillion being spent there. But ultimately tools for individuals. And I think, yoga and breath work and meditation being something that any individual can tap into to help deal with all this stress and all this sort of external issues that are going on. And a lot of it is out of our control, right? And a lot of it is, depending on what you see, so much time on social media. So it's always an inner battle too of keeping calm, keeping, grounded, and obviously acting if you're in immediate danger. But for the most part, we might not be in immediate danger, despite calls for global jihad today. But that set aside just keeping your guard up, but also knowing that it's so important to relax your nervous system
Yeah.
because those cortisol levels and that stress builds up over time and it can lead to, really serious health issues down the road. So having those tools as an individual is, one way that I've seen to really help me personally, even with helping to heal some of the past traumas or experiences that I've seen or been through, or helping other people in my life, have these practices that you can take on a daily basis. And running is a big one for me too, honestly. I know you're a big runner. You're training for the Dallas Marathon, which is awesome.
Nice.
And I ran while I was actually doing the yoga teacher training in Bali last year. I was training for the Jerusalem Marathon, and so I ran the Jerusalem Marathon in 2022 in Israel,
Wow.
which was an amazing experience. And it ended up being 40 and raining, so it was a tough one. And it got 2,000 feet of gain loss there, but it was awesome
Wow.
to run through the old city and around Mount Scopus, where the Hebrew U campus is, where I lived. So just a lot of memories coming back, and then running Austin Marathon here earlier this year, beating my time by 22 minutes. Better conditions, but also continuing to get, work on myself and improve. I think it's important for people to realize taking your health into your own hands is one of the best things you can do to, kind of stay level-headed and present during these times.
I definitely, I mean, I think you're leading by example, and so many people can learn from the things you're doing, and the optimism. And you talk about the sense of life, how people don't have that sense of life anymore. And I see what you're doing, and it's the complete opposite. Taking control of your actions, and the ownership, the accountability, and then having that positive attitude about it. Like, I can make it great. It seems like, as an outsider looking in, that's awesome. And I was wondering, so did you always have that? So say, like you said, starting out your story, you wanted to go into healthcare. You decided, okay, I don't want to be a doctor, but I want to make a difference. Did you see the system as broken, and did you have any ideas of how you wanted to fix it, or how you think it should be done?
Yeah, I mean, I think initially I didn't see the full extent of the brokenness. I mean, you saw challenges, and having worked in strategy consulting everywhere from Bangor, Maine to Yakima, Washington, and smaller health systems, bigger health systems trying to organize themselves to take on this increase in demand. So we had the company I was working for at a 10-year forecast for demand at the disease and procedure-based level. So we could give very specific guidelines and projections for what facilities they should be building, another acute inpatient tower, or invest in ambulatory surgery centers and your primary care network. So having worked on over a couple dozen projects, it definitely opened my eyes and just learned a lot. Like, I would say I didn't really have an opinion. I was taking what I learned and trying to provide the best support that I could. But being more junior, there are other people on the team you could rely on too. But doing the analysis, getting into the numbers of it, I really enjoyed that piece of it. But even then, the finances weren't working with C-suite execs in strategy. They weren't even in the projects, had some financial components, but we didn't even really dig into what was happening under the hood. And that's why I wanted to get into payer space, and then working in Medicaid and just seeing all of the waste and, challenges with a program that's designed for low income individuals, but now has ballooned to, over 85 million people being on Medicaid, and those rates being so low that they also, they're basically subsidized by the commercial payers and big employers who have these plans with the large payers. So when I was in Medicaid working and seeing, okay, they're losing hundreds of millions of dollars a year on this business line, taking in a lot of the data and components to say, here are the challenges, how can we improve this? But then now starting to see the kinks of, what's really going to change, perverse incentives at the individual level as well in terms of decision making, what's being focused on, was super eye-opening for me. And then getting outside the US bubble was a big learning curve for me too, because we take the US system just as given, but we shouldn't have to spend 2 to 3 times more than the next country on healthcare, and now having worse outcomes. So taking an academic approach, but really from a lens of understanding risk, understanding what insurance really means when you're pooling health and financial risk of a population, and that there is no perfect system. Even all the government systems, it's basically just coming out of your taxes, whether it's social health insurance or different types of tax funded or are private. There are going to be these underlying challenges of asymmetric information and moral hazard and adverse selection and other reasons why systems can go awry and become inefficient ultimately, and having this sort of death spiral of insurance and ultimately people not paying, having a difference of a payer, consumer, and provider of healthcare. And when those are all different, oftentimes when you're not paying for your own healthcare that you're consuming, you don't really care about the price. You don't care where you're going. So
Yeah.
we don't have that decision making ingrained, which has also led to lack of responsibility in a lot of the issues. So I think that really opened up my eyes to the challenges in healthcare. And then seeing a solution like CrowdHealth, where it's really people voluntarily contributing to each other, each other's bills and negotiating directly with providers, realizing that when you haven't given up your agency to a health insurance plan, you can get a better price. Seeing there are more ways to do that, it was, and then having a Bitcoin element of first savings, and now hopefully at some point, spending and using it as a medium of exchange for crowdfunding and paying doctors as well has been a focus of mine, because I think that aspect and of really using Bitcoin and having it in adoption will help fix a lot of the issues, but it's 20% of the economy at this point. So, and a lot of the government programs are basically jobs programs. So it's just really, the incentives are really off. And I believe there's no single policy change or incremental change that's going to fix it, right? It's going to have to be this sort of continued movement to decentralization and people actually taking responsibility for knowing what's in their food, their nutrition, to their health, and having better habits. But of course, it's challenging for a lot of people when the money is inflating and it's harder to buy the things that you once bought and having to work all these jobs. So that's where, again, I see it all connected. It's all kind of interplaying. But being here in Austin has been great because there's so many people focused on solutions, I think, and giving people tools to, exit these legacy systems that we just took for granted growing up. And now having other options.
Yeah, the healthcare, I think it's one of the most challenging problems, because it is crazy how high these bills are and how inefficient they are and how they get a lot of things wrong on your bills, and you're paying for a $50 cup of coffee that just doesn't make sense. But also all the health innovation is coming out of the United States, it seems like. So I'm sure the massive amount of funding towards that and investment in that has something to do with it. So do you have a theory of why compared to other services, other industries, what about health being like, it is life or death? It has to do with people living and dying or quality of life directly. What is so much different about healthcare than the other services in the economy that seem to run much more efficiently?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of it starts with regulation and having overregulation of health insurance and then perverse incentives from that regulation. One major point being with the Obamacare law coming into effect around 2010 or so. They restricted the profits of health insurance companies to 15%, meaning the medical loss ratio or the amount that they spend on healthcare. For every $100 in premiums they bring in, they have to spend 85 on medical care. So that caps a percent of the bottom line. But now to grow the actual bottom line, in United Healthcare being the 7th biggest company in the world by revenue, the premiums have to rise. So year over year, you have these underlying incentives now where the government tried to say, oh, well, insurance companies are making too much, let's cap their profits. Well, they're still going to find a way, to make profits. And now as your agent, we've seen 200% plus increases in health insurance and healthcare prices in the last 2 decades, versus that chart with, TVs or other technology, which should be a deflationary force, right? And Jeff Booth, Price of Tomorrow, gets into all of those details.
Yeah.
You've seen a lot of innovation in the healthcare space, right? All the surgeries and having hip replacements just be, an everyday thing, and all the amazing medical interventions that have helped extend life to some extent, we've now built a system where people are very reliant on pharmaceutical industry as well for their everyday, and just the cycle of ultimately poor metabolic health. So I think with that regulation and with Medicare and Medicaid being a big part of government spend, around 700 billion a year, they're slated to run out of money in a few years. Like, we don't know if these programs that came into existence even in the 60s will be around for us. Like, I'm not counting on that being around in 30 years. While my parents, and they're turning Medicare age now, like, they'll be able to use it at least for a little while. But I think the whole system isn't really sustainable, especially with 10,000 people aging into that Medicare every day, really like a silver tsunami. We have the boomer generation continuing to grow, and this was something we were saying a decade ago. But again, the move to virtual care, the move to more outpatient care, trying to have lower cost settings has been great movement in healthcare, but you hear a lot of buzzwords and value-based care and this and that. But ultimately, if you're not taking on risk for the population or yourself, it's still not going to have a huge meaningful change because of the centralizing factors as well, I think is another huge one. So you have 5 big payers, you have these health systems that have huge regions across the US, or even nonprofits, like Ascension, that don't pay taxes and are run like a business, and are these massive enterprises that end up with monopolies or duopolies in certain towns. So they or cities, so they try to increase their negotiating power with the payers. You see the payers and the providers continuing to butt heads. Well, who's left out? The patient, the consumer, the individual, who doesn't know what to do and is confused. We have also, one of the only 2 countries in the world with pharmaceutical advertisements, right? Us and New Zealand. So people are being pumped these messages of what's the latest and greatest drug. And you talk about drug like Ozempic and weight loss drug now. They're literally separating it out from the GDP of Denmark because it's having such an impact in like doubling their GDP. Like, it's crazy for Novo Nordisk. But still, drug spend is only 10% of overall. That's around 400 billion a year compared to the 4+ trillion. So there's a lot of these challenges, and then shortages of doctors and people that aren't. It's becoming so hyper specialized as well that you don't have generalists or people that can take care of other towns. Centralization into the cities, and then a lack of responsibility at the individual level, because you say, oh, these things will get taken care of. So I think it's a combining of those factors, but ultimately fiat money, fiat healthcare. You look at all the charts. So since 1971, it's super evident. Administrators growing 300% compared to physicians being basically flat in that growth, 2,000%. So it's just, every metric you look at, you can go deeper and deeper. And again, I spent a lot of time studying this. It's just so eye-opening, and also the vertical integration of these payers, buying providers, buying the pharmaceutical benefit managers, the PBMs. They're just setting prices against themselves. Like, they're not really negotiating with anybody. So that's why I think, one, breaking out as an individual, but then also making it possible for providers to start accepting Bitcoin. We had some early movement in this area. Keith Smith and others at the Oklahoma Surgery Center, even almost a decade ago, started putting it out there. They were accepting Bitcoin. You can find the YouTube videos of them talking about it, because they actually display their prices. They actually show fair prices for healthcare. I don't know how much it's been used to this point, but I recently started my own company, Satoshi Health Advisors, and really focused on wanting to help providers accept Bitcoin. So I was working with Veronica here at Ultra Personal Healthcare, and I think one great vertical, and that she's a part of, is direct primary care. So it's paying monthly for a provider, physician, nurse practitioner to take care of you and your family, and having that access. And then now we're already outside the insurance system, right? Because the insurance system is all of it convoluted with pre-negotiations and this long process of contract negotiation. You let go of all that, what's your fair price? That's value for value. That's a sovereign individual. And if you go, you can see she wrote an awesome piece on her website and about why she's accepting Bitcoin. But I think we're going to see more and more movement, particularly in direct primary care, but even orthopedic clinics or others, imaging labs that say, here's my fair price. Let's get out of this insurance nonsense. And hey, let's actually lower our transaction costs, because instead of spending 6 to 10% per transaction, that is the norm, especially for the large health systems, because the claims and billings processes are so complicated. let's pay less than 1%, if not approaching 0%, using the Lightning Network, right?
Wow.
Fractions of a penny to transact value. So that's why I think Bitcoin from a payments tool can be integrated in a lot of different ways and tools that are being built in the healthcare space. And I want to try to help make those connections, which is what I've continued doing with CrowdHealth, working with them and looking at other ways to integrate Bitcoin, and then also providers and finding those intersections where you have enough users too that really want to use it, right? Let's use Bitcoin. Yeah, it's a opportunity cost at this point to spend something that's going up 150% year over year compared to the dollar. But I think Parker Lewis's recent piece, Pay Me in Bitcoin Theory, is really spot on, where it's going to be the merchants that have to say, no, pay me in Bitcoin. This is a balance sheet strategy. I want to hold this as savings. That will also, and offering discounts as well for and passing along those transaction fee savings to users to actually say, yes, I want to pay this person in Bitcoin because I want their services to be around in 5 to 10 years, right? And want them to continue providing that value.
And I think you could do even with your friends if you pay for like a meal, let's say, and they want to pay you back, instead of Venmo, say, oh, I only accept Bitcoin. And I think every little bit helps to spread the word. But it makes so much sense from your background and anyone in the healthcare industry that sees the unintended consequences of the centralization and central planning that comes with that. And then you see Bitcoin and you see the Federal Reserve and the fiat system, and it's like the same exact thing that's happening. I didn't know that you found out about Bitcoin in 2020, but I wonder if it's pretty amazing how well of a grasp you got on it in that short amount of time. Because I probably met you, 2022, maybe early 2022, and I thought, oh man, this guy's an OG, this guy's an expert. This is who I need to pick his mind and learn all about Bitcoin. So that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I appreciate it, and I think it was a decision for me to just really dive in and read and consume as much information as I could, and not being from a technical background, but still reading, mastering Bitcoin and understanding how the transactions work, running a node at home, getting involved in the Lightning Network, routing transactions, and just showing up and learning and realizing there's so many people working on cool projects and are willing to share and have these conversations. So to me, as I started going down, I was like, wow, this is so obvious that this is the solution to so many issues that we are facing at a fundamental level. And having the opportunity as well, I think, to travel throughout a lot of this time, get out of my normal environment, go to dozens of countries, see the way they're living, experiencing hyperinflation firsthand. Those people in those countries, like Zimbabwe, like Argentina, that I met, they understand Bitcoin right away. At the end of 2021, I ended up tipping my safari guide, Mike, in Bitcoin by the end of the safari, because he right away is like, oh yeah, this, I've had all my savings wiped out. Even the head of the village was also a healer, a really, super interesting village outside Victoria Falls. When I started explaining Bitcoin, he said, yeah, we come to a consensus mechanism here. We store our value in goats and cows long term. When the government money hyperinflated in 2008, we were fine. We produced our own food. They had to pay us a ton more to get the valuable things we were making. So they see it firsthand. I haven't been in Argentina earlier this year, and they've had over 100% inflation since I was there 8-9 months ago. We went on an awesome Bitcoiner walking tour with Geronimo down there. And he took us to the central bank. There's a museum of the central bank. You can see all the failed currencies out for display. This isn't hidden. This is very clear. So it'd be really interesting to see in a week, if Milei gets elected in Argentina.
Yeah.
And they actually abolish a central bank that has been their woes since World War II, right? They were a top 5 country 100 years ago. Like, it's crazy to see how quickly they fell. And it's such a beautiful country, but 40% of the people are completely living off the government out of their 45 million people. And there's disincentives to work, massive taxes, all these things. And, kids growing up without their parents, seeing their parents work. And, things just being like so backwards, I think helped me just traveling and being in these countries, again, opening my mind, open to different cultures, the way of living of different people, and realizing that 12 unelected officials sitting in a room in the Fed deciding the price of money does have an impact for that Indonesian rice farmer And he might not see it or know about it, but that is impacting his work and what he can sell his goods for. So being able to take that power, out of the state, and I think as well, Sovereign Individual, Fourth Turning being a couple books that were really eye-opening for me, having studied history to a good extent, but really thinking about it in terms of cycles, not only the 80-year saculum that we see in our lifetime, but also these bigger 500-year cycles of centralization and decentralization that we've gone through, and having separated church and state around 500 years ago. Now I think moving towards separating money and state and just having a neutral money that we can all use, and uniting the world and having it be an open network, and all these principles of Bitcoin that anyone can tap into. And I was in South Africa, and I was proud to be the first visitor of Bitcoin Akasi. It's been amazing seeing their growth in the last almost 2 years. With Arman and Mutando and the team there, they're actually hosting Adopting Bitcoin in January 2024, which is incredible to see that growth. And when we were driving through, as I said, with it, with an extended stay, uh, I bought a couple bananas from a shopkeeper at Espaza at one of the shops there, and used Bitcoin, and it was, I think it was 592 sats and 1 sat fee, and I didn't have to go in and out of Rand. You don't have credit card terminals. It was just like, it was amazing, right? It was just sending Bitcoin to this shop owner, and that's what they're doing with an education. So I think helping the kids learn, hey, this, and then going out and orange pilling the shops to an extent and saying, I want to buy, I'm earning Bitcoin for working in this program, being a surf instructor. Now I want to buy some food. I don't want to have to go exchange for Rand. Let's just exchange Bitcoin. So having these circular economies being built in communities around the world is, I think, incredible, and seeing the grassroots movements, but then creating these circular economies as well in other industries, even in the US, and saying, yes, we're privileged here with the dollar and being the world reserve currency of the world, likely won't remain that way forever, or even necessarily for that much longer with these level of $33.5 trillion of debt. So why don't we try a different way and build these systems and communities so that we're not reliant on anybody else, or we can't have our bank accounts canceled from us. So yeah, I know a long-winded way, but it's just been so eye-opening in the last couple of years of really going into Bitcoin. And I think I wasn't ready for it in the later 2010s. Obviously it was around, I'd heard about it, but I was going through my own stuff and, just distracted. And I think that's how a lot of people, I'm sure, still are too, and everyone comes to it in their own time. But it does take a focus, a level of commitment to say, like, I really want to learn about this. There's so many things beyond my expertise of computer engineering and of cryptography and even behavioral, and I had some history studying behavioral economics and, and game theory in these aspects, both in undergrad, but even in a healthcare context too. So that's helped me, I think, from an economic perspective, really appreciate the value of knowing the monetary policy, having that digital scarcity programmed in so that everything else can become abundant around us.
How much did yoga affect your ability to focus and stay present in that time when you're learning? You said before you were focusing on other things. Did it help you kind of understand what your true values are?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and I'd started practicing yoga even 6, 7 years ago, as I was going through some of my own personal challenges and getting so caught up in the stress and anxiety of this consulting job. Going through some, really some soul searching there, but finding yoga, and then ultimately realizing that there are all these, shared values between Bitcoin and yoga, and having the tools then throughout the last couple years. Because I think you need to allow your brain to, like, the space to make these connections. So our thinking brain, our prefrontal cortex, this part of our mind, is really only 7% of the capacity of our brain, right? 90% is the subconscious, and then 3% or so is your kind of autonomic and really these brain stem and automatic things that are even built in. So when you can tap into the subconscious mind, you can then help rewire your conscious mind in the way that you think. But the only way to tap into that is to quiet the mind. So if you're only thinking all the time with our rational thoughts, or thinking about, again, the future or the past and not being present, it's incredibly difficult to, I think, make the connections and then allow for that rewiring of the brain, and be open to other possibilities. So, I think, and then ultimately Bitcoin and yoga sharing these values of liberation, freedom from suffering, having this inner peace, but also staying present, certainly contributed to me understanding Bitcoin. And I think a lot of these thoughts and things came to me also like after practicing yoga or being in Shavasana at the end. And, you try to stay present with the movements, with the asanas, but oftentimes you come to these other thoughts. But then you can make room for those connections as well.
What's crazy is I know exactly what you're saying, how important it is to stay in the present, but it's not something that, I figured out I need to stay in the present. I'm good for the rest of life. I can just always stay in the present. Like, it takes active thought and practice, and I think yoga is a great way. I don't know, have you heard of the book? It's a Spencer Johnson, the Precious Present. It's like the short story. It's a short story about a young boy and his interaction with this man he meets and their relationship over time. And there's like, the man says, you'll be happy once you get the precious present. And so this boy just keeps wishing every year. He's like, I hope someone gives me that present, or I hope it's given to me. And it talks about like how easy it is to look into the past, how easy it is to look in the future. But the true like value in life is staying present. So that's really that really resonates with me. And I think yoga is a great way of just daily of, you can't, that the whole thing of, I haven't practiced it as near as much as you, but every time I've done it, it's that time where you're just alone with your thoughts and focusing on the movement, and it's definitely mind clearing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hadn't heard of that book, but would love to read it. The Power of Now is another great one. And also Autobiography of the Yogi by Yogananda is a really interesting story. Also using Kriya Yoga, specifically Kriya meaning cleanse, and getting rid of a lot of these negative thought patterns and negative energy that we store in our body all over. So there are different practices of even tapping and connecting to different parts of your body, releasing that negative energy and allowing positive energy to flow in. So that prana. Prana means energy, and that's also one of the key connections with Bitcoin, right? You think about how intertwined physical energy is with Bitcoin, and Bitcoin mining now consuming half the percent of the world's energy, but for good reason, to have this open ledger that we can all transact and show proof of work and not be able to double spend and solve the Byzantine general's problem and all of the things that Bitcoin does, has this physical tie to energy, just like Henry Ford said 100 years ago that he wanted to see this physical backing with energy, because it keeps us rooted in reality. Our fiat world can kind of utilize previous resources we've generated, while instead of building up the stock of savings that we had done for so long in civilization, and having that tie with energy, I think is a really clear one. And yeah, I think to your point too, yoga really means connect. It means union. It means yuj is the Sanskrit word for it. So it's aligning your mind, body, and spirit together. And we think of yoga a lot of times now, even in this kind of westernized context, people think about it like a workout, a HIIT workout or Pilates or whatever. No, it's actually really the focus on ultimately reaching samadhi, which is like this meditative state, in the 8 limbs of yoga that Patanjali wrote about 2,000 years ago. But the history of yoga even goes further back, and kind of also tying together with the mysterious and mythical origins with Satoshi. You have Adi Shiva Yogi, which was the first yogi, in the stories that were passed down even for thousands of years in some of these practices. So I think energy, really being that universal currency of life, we have energy flowing through us all the time, whether we're focused on it or not. But tapping into our breath is something that, again, we're going to breathe without focusing on it, But now if we focus on our breath, we breathe into our lower belly, expand all the way up, you automatically, you feel the difference. You can feel more calm. You can feel centered and present. So there are a lot of tools and pranayamas, which are other breathwork practices, kind of within this whole yoga umbrella. And that's, I think, as I've gone deeper and deeper, seeing those connections again was just continuing to really be mind opening, because you can take action. You can, again, the asanas are the movement. That's what people will recognize. It's certainly an awesome way to practice. But if your mind is elsewhere and you're just moving your body, you're not going to get the full benefit of it as well.
Yeah.
So,
And I love these the shared values between Bitcoin and yoga. And so for all the listeners, Jon has made that, like I've been referencing, that ghost website, the Bitcoin Yogi, where it's his blog, and he has multiple just really in-depth posts about these connections. And so Jon, when did you decide to actually document that and write it down and share the world? Because I think it's very valuable. So I'm glad you did it.
yeah, thank you. I mean, yeah, the first thoughts of it even came over a couple years ago, spending time, I'd say then really in Bali, and throughout 2022, Aaron and I kept traveling to Israel, as I said. We were in Italy and Spain, and as we were traveling and was then looking to get back to full-time work, I had the time to write a lot and then kind of document a lot of my thoughts. So I wrote a lot of it last year, and then, starting it and then going back at CrowdHealth kind of went a little bit to the side. And then earlier this year, really into 2023, in the spring, I saw all of this here, continuing to practice. I said, okay, I really want to put this out there. I want to share these thoughts with the world. And, oftentimes even I have a lot of hesitation, or, it can be tough to just put things out there. But at the end of the day, I said, hey, this is out there and living. If it resonates with one person, that's great. And I love that, really appreciate your support, Mike, and having read it and really take some time with it. So I think, again, everyone has their own story. Everyone has their unique insight to share. And I felt like no one was talking about Bitcoin and yoga. And, there are so many different aspects and depth of Bitcoin that you see so many, comparisons, and Bitcoin and beef, and, and Bitcoin and mushrooms and all these other areas. It's like, look, that's, I think, a testament to these universal values and principles, and really reaching that universal consciousness that we all share as humans here, and being connected with the earth, that I decided, hey, I'm going to put this out there. I have kind of the last piece on Himalayan Kriya Yoga that I'm going to publish next week. So probably by the time this is out, people can read that as well. So it's about a 7-part series diving in to all the shared values between Bitcoin and yoga, as well as some other kind of parallels that I dig into, and always and happy to share in this format as well. Because I think speaking about it, practicing it, reading it, it kind of continues to resonate and stick, depending on also how open we are. So we'll continue sharing some of my other thoughts on current events, or really health and travel and some other things I'm working on. And just having a site, I think Ghost is really cool. It's easy to spin up, open source platform, and then Zaprite, making it super easy as well to just put out there a payment link people want to share, or if in a value for value way, or just consume. And I don't want to have like paywalls out there. I want people to be able to have this information, and the tools are there, and the education and resources are there. So I think people taking the time to read, whether it's my work on the Bitcoin Yogi, or whether it's anyone else's writing that's out there. There's definitely some newsletters that have been really influential for me, and just staying kind of up to date, but also continuing to learn, but also really be open to, hey, this is one aspect that I think I can contribute and share. And then having shared yoga at the Bitcoin conference or at Black Boom in Austin this year was really fun. The first day we did some yoga and meditation and breathwork practices, and then the second day we actually did Himalayan Kriya Yoga. And it was amazing to share with the Bitcoin community directly. It can be a lot of sitting and listening during these conferences. Obviously, great connecting and networking too, but which can be exhausting. So taking that hour in the beginning of the day Someone even coming up to me and said, hey, they haven't felt emotions like for years, and they just block this part off of them. And the practices really open them back up to release and feel again. Or another that had just lost their dad, and just give them time to really heal, and have time to themselves. So, you never know when those types of things are always going to happen. Everyone's dealing with their own stuff, and being able to share these practices is something I want to continue to be able to do. And I think having some of these Bitcoin communities in beautiful places in the world, like Costa Rica or El Salvador, that already naturally are hubs for yoga and connection to the earth and going in the ocean, all these aspects, but then ultimately proof of work too. It's so important for Bitcoin. It's such a central tenet to everything that's being built in the space, in building. And that's proof of work with building a daily yoga practice or finding meditation that works for you, even, Headspace or Calm or something else. Giving yourself 5-10 minutes in the day to really sit, be present, try to release everything else, all the other noise going on, and just tuning into your breath, tuning into your body, noticing how you feel. And then also building up, right? It can, going upside down or learning the asanas and your Surya Namaskars, your sun salutations, knowing the sequences so that you can even do it on your own. You don't even need a teacher, and you can be your own teacher in that way. That's also, I think, very much an aspect of proof of work that resonated with me. And then can kind of get into a couple more of these values if you think,
Yeah.
if you want to.
To that point too, I just remind me of what you did at BitBlock Boom, which I made the first day, and it was super beneficial. And I noticed it reminded me again of Bitcoin yoga is for everybody. You don't have to run marathons to be doing yoga. Like it's more of, like you said, the mindset, the breathing, and you could work up as you advance to more advanced poses. But there's no barrier to entry, which was really cool. And again, on what you're doing, how impactful it is I think a lot of people, when I talk about Bitcoin, all they know is, number go up. It's some Ponzi scheme, some crypto scam, and that's all they see is like some people trying to get rich quick. But then you need stuff like what you're writing. It's not like, what's the Bitcoin price going to be in 2025? Like that doesn't really add any value to me. But when I read your content, it shows the true value, the true use of Bitcoin and why it's so important. So that I'm much more likely to share something like that, the Bitcoin Yogi. I think it connects to a lot more people than just the price hysteria. But so everyone should go check out the site. I'll have it in the show notes, and it goes in depth. It's multiple parts, and we've really just been covering a lot of the topics on the first part. So the first one, you talked about being present, talked about energy. I loved the quote. You said it here again. Energy is the universal currency of life. I think that's so true. Proof of work, and then I wanted to cover a couple more. If you have the time, the decentralization and low time preference. So how have you found the overlap between yoga and Bitcoin for decentralization and low time preference?
Yeah, absolutely. And you touched on it. It's that there's no barriers. It's only internal blockages or the unwillingness to ask questions that can keep someone from really knowing themselves. So you don't need anything external, right? As an individual in Bitcoin as well, it's an open network. Anyone can download the Bitcoin code, Bitcoin core software, run a node, send transactions. There's no barriers there. Obviously, there's some technical tools, or it's becoming easier and easier to use it. But at the fundamental level, everyone is sovereign in that sense, and there's no central issuer, and so on. With yoga, there are a lot of ways to practice as well, but there's no one, yoga school. There's no one, body that says this is yoga, right? Here are some guidelines, here are some principles and teachings that different kind of lineages have had. And here's ways that you can tap into your breath and move your body in a way that feels best for you. So no one is stopping you from ever going to yourself and connecting to your breath. And, I think that's where it needs to be self-guided. Like an individual needs to take that initiative to say, hey, I want to do this. Now, how can I do this? And there are always people willing to share, and you can go, and so many communities around the world are now, sharing these practices and sharing yoga, that really only started to get even more prevalent over the last 100 years. Sri Krishnacharya was one of the ones, but there was a really big blockage when even the British were in India over sharing these practices. And I think a lot of it is because it's so empowering for people, right? When people realize that they can take the power into their own hands and they're strengthened through their meditation practice, through yoga, they're going to start to question other things in their life as well and have the strength and that energy physically and emotionally to tackle the other challenges in their life. So certainly decentralization in the sense that anyone can tap into this open network, I think was really, really resonated with me and so many schools to learn from.
Yeah. And the fact Bitcoin, that's, I think, the key for me. That's the key difference between the rest of crypto, where it kind of ties in with energy as well. You can get rugged, but like Bitcoin, there is no CEO. It's totally decentralized, and it's a necessary feature for sound money. That once you have that issue, or once you have the central planning that you saw in the medical system, that you see in our fiat system with the Federal Reserve, that is just a recipe for failure. It may last a few years if you have some people that can make good decisions, but even then, it's probably like, how do you even know what a good decision is? It's not the market. It's an impossible job, and the fact that we even try, I think, is ludicrous. So
yeah, and I think around the time that ties in exactly with time preference, and I think with the rest of crypto and everyone else think, oh, I'm going to make a buck quick, during a bull market. That's very high time preference, right? Oh, I'm going to try to make more fiat now, but take on these very risky behaviors for down the road and likely to get wrecked. You see this concept of time preference, where those that can delay the pleasures of the present and invest in their future, invest in future utility, future benefits and growth by sacrificing something in the present, or by at least not consuming as much right now, by saving for the future and making those decisions day to day, I think is inherent in Bitcoin through those that have held it throughout the years and have realized that their purchasing power continues to increase year over year, and not trying to time the market, but realizing, hey, this Bitcoin's going to be here for the long haul. And as well as in the yoga practice, right? You're not going to, the first time you practice, it's going to be hard. It's going to feel weird. But continuing to work at it day in, day out, you see the benefits down the road. So I think any yogi, particularly with the Ashtanga sequence, is even this can take any 2 to 3 hours or more. People are going it's the lineage of Patabi Joyce, doing one posture for a significant amount of time just to get it perfect, or in there the best they can do before they even move to the next sequence. And I'd love to I've done some Ashtanga practice. I haven't, through our yoga teacher training, I haven't really spent the time to go fully into it, to commit. And that's something I would love to do from a low time preference perspective at some point. So that's where I love that it's just so deep. There's so many areas where you can continue to go deeper, continue to learn, and decide for your mental, physical, and spiritual health that you're going to have this discipline. And it applies to so many aspects of life, whether it's what we eat, again, how we move our body, the types of situations. And if there's something that you don't like, change it, right? Take the action, find that you can be aligned and not have any of this cognitive dissonance where your actions aren't aligning with your thoughts. Because, no one's here to save you, but you can save yourself. And you can try to put yourself in the best position for you and your family to succeed. And I think having that community and knowing the strength too of, having the Bitcoin community here in Austin, having other yogis that I've practiced with, other Jews around the world, being a Jew and showing support for Israel and having lived there as well. Everyone I think has their tribe and can have people that, hey, they support and they're there for. But ultimately, it's you as an individual to make those decisions. So I hope that, yeah, love to continue diving in also, to other aspects of the piece, and would love for people to provide feedback and say, hey, does this resonate? Does it not? Is this completely out there? But at least in my personal experience, it's rung true for as I've continued to learn about Bitcoin, and really study it, as I've continued to learn about yoga. There's a lot of connection and a lot of pride that I have then in sharing the tools and wanting to help people heal as well. So I think that I've been sharing some biweekly yoga and meditation sessions as well, with CrowdHealth and wellness workshops. I invite people to join in on those. Those are happening over Zoom. And if anyone else wants to practice, just let me know. I mean, I'm happy to share. These are really powerful tools that you can then take on yourself and continue to grow in your own way.
Yeah, and I should be able to put a link to that in the show notes, right? You guys got like
Yeah.
a Zoom link? Okay, awesome. Yeah, I don't know how you could have that discipline kind of mindset and accountability for your own life initiative that you were just describing and not be a happy person. I think that is so key. And I love just to close out that low time preference piece in your first post. You say, quote, "The dedicated yogi understands that wholehearted commitment today will pay off for one's mental, physical, and spiritual health in the years to come." And I think that's so true. And just realizing that your life you want a long, healthy life, a vibrant life, the whole life, not just now. And yoga, I'm just thinking of every old person I know that's a yogi is awesome. They're super active, they're fit, they're able to move, and just to be able to be like that with your grandkids one day, I think is definitely worth it to get on the path of being healthy, health conscious, active, healthy mind. So thank you for making that content, and I'll share the link so everyone can get introduced. And it doesn't matter where you started, where you're from, how bad you've been so far. If you can all you can do is what's moving forward. So I think you're laying out the path. But
Awesome.
yeah, just thank you so much, Jon, for taking the time on this Friday to talk Bitcoin, talk yoga. Your awesome story. I had no idea how much was packed in the last 3 years, which is pretty amazing. But looking forward to the years to come.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mike, for having me on your show. I love listening to you and all of your guests. I think everyone has a really unique story, and love the way that you ask questions and listen, and really, featuring such diverse people. So I, again, appreciate being on. Would love to come back on if you'd have me. Continue chatting. This was a lot of fun. And yeah, looking forward to seeing you again at further future Austin Bitcoin meetups.
Of course, you're welcome on here anytime, and that'll do it for the Mike White Podcast with Jon Gordon. See ya. Thank you for listening to the Mike White Podcast. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Mike White Pod, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Y'all have a great day.